first hardware podcast or first hardware founder of season 3.
Nice.
So Dylan, you're the founder of Evergreen. What is Evergreen?
So Evergreen creates devices that help people make money from their hardware. We started with a crypto mining device that uses hard drives. And so people just plug it in and they just start making money.
And generally, you know, when you talk about hardware, especially like early stage hardware startups, you really don't think about making money or being profitable in the first year. You usually don't hear about it either, but you have some very interesting numbers that you generally don't see, kind of like in the hardware space. You did something like $1 million in like your first year or two. So what was the story of kind of how you got started?
Yeah. So, I mean, I've been doing hardware for a long time, and most of the stories with hardware is you just get stuck on, you know, development. And even once you have a prototype, it can then take a couple $100K to get it into production. So after doing this for years and working at companies too, and just seeing like how much money they had to invest before even getting out into the market, I definitely kind of had a thesis, which was like, just like software, I need to get into the market very quickly. I need to ship product very quickly. And the way that I did that was using off-the-shelf components and 3D printing. So specifically in this business, from the time that I kind of came up with this idea and validated it, and before I even built it, I validated I could distribute it. I emailed some folks and said, hey, if I made this, would you put it on your channel, right? And once I got the go-ahead, I made the prototype in like 2 weeks, just barely had it working, like really MVP. They put it on their site. And that's how we got the first pre-orders, right?
What was the functionality of the first prototype?
So again, it's really nice kind of in crypto mining that it just has to make money, right? You don't have to build that much features. You just have to be able to monitor it, right? So the first device was a Raspberry Pi and a hard drive, plug it into the wall. It just has some LEDs on it. And at the time, it didn't even have a mobile app. You would just go to like a little web page and it would say like, you're earning money. And in crypto, you know you're earning money because the money comes into your wallet. If it doesn't come into your wallet, you've probably got the wrong thing or it's not working.
Interesting. And so what was the process of reaching out to these people? Was it like YouTube channels or like websites?
Yeah, well, so, I from a young age was very much trying to build products and startups. And I knew kind of in the back of my head that a lot of good projects start as side projects or hobbies, right? And so at the time, I kind of shut my brain off. I actually swore to myself, I'm not doing another startup. But I wanted to make some money. And so I got into crypto mining just as a way for me to make money. So how did I get into it? Well, I went through like the user journey, the customer journey. I, went on YouTube, learned about it, bought my parts. I was in, 5 different Discords, et cetera. So it was very easy for me after doing that for, 2 months. I knew who the players were that influenced this market because they were the ones who, everybody talked about, hey, I learned this from this guy, I learned this from that guy. So then for me to turn around and reach out to those guys and say, hey, I'm a part of your community. You taught me how to do these things. Is this something that you would be interested in, right? That was the easiest way to do it versus like what I had done in the past was like, hey, like try the thing I've been trying to invent for the last year, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of people try to start startups for the sake of starting startups, and they usually run out of money because they don't have some unique insight or they're trying to like steal someone else's idea or whatever. But you kind of had the community aspect down. You clearly weren't like an outsider. You probably knew how to speak the language properly. And so then that got you your first, I guess, placements on these channels.
Yeah. So he like posted the video, and he was honest with the community. Hey, this is a new, company. The first thing was, hey, everybody go join the Discord. And I got a couple hundred people in the Discord. And from there it was, hey guys, I have, a limited batch of 50. I'm going to, sign up here and I will select you to get the prototype.
Gotcha. And how much were you selling the first prototype for?
We had 2 versions, $7.99 and like $14.99.
Okay. So $800, $1,500. And when you were selling it to these people, what was the promise? Just that they would be able to plug it into their wall and make money?
Yeah. So this specific market, like a lot of these guys like just want to try different things.
Gotcha.
And for me, and the reason why I had gone into hard drives is because a lot of these folks are like running out of energy, or like I kind of say like as a joke, like the wife test, right? Like, is your wife going to be pissed at you for like putting this in the garage? So like that, as somebody who that happened to me, it wasn't my wife, it was my dad. He was like, why are you running this? Like, get this out of my house. I knew I had something that passed the test, right? So the impetus for buying this product in particular versus buying any other product in the market was it's low power, it's on a new network, and people relatively had, faith that the network was, something they would want it to be a part of.
And so then you were charging $800 to $1,500. How many did you sell in the first batch?
50.
50.
Yeah.
So you had like 50K of revenue coming in straight in the first few months.
That was just in a couple weeks.
Just a couple weeks.
Just a couple weeks, yeah.
Interesting. And what did you do after that?
I had to build them, right? So
because you sold it like off a landing page, basically.
off a prototype, one single
off a
prototype. That took me 2 weeks to make.
Gotcha.
Right, because that was someone committed and said, hey, can you get me a prototype? I said, yes. It took me about 2 weeks.
And then what happens next? So you have this prototype, bunch of sales.
Yeah, so I had to build them, right? And so at the time it was just me. I had the 50,000, that I sold it for, and I was trying to sell it at a competitive margin. So there really wasn't much on the table, but I grinded, I got all the parts. The way that these devices work is they actually have to sit in like kind of a server for, a day or two. And at the time the software was very not good at all. I was using off the shelf. Yeah.
How long ago was this?
About 2 years ago.
Okay.
So this was right around the time I moved to Daly City. So in this hacker house that I was in called Edify, I like took over the living room with a couple of my PCs that just had hard drives connected to them like 24/7. And then in the basement, I had my 3D printer and I had my sander and my little glue assembly, right? I'm super gluing them. So it took me like, 5 months to put all these things together. And in that time, not only did I have to actually build them, but the software was like rapidly changing, right? I had to keep updating the software, and very lucky that I had experience building devices with, OTA updates and the ability to actually still work with the devices once they've left the house. I warn all hardware founders, like, do not ship products without the ability, especially early on, the ability to update them or even like shell into that, right? Even go on and actually be able to do stuff, because I had to swap out the whole software stack mid-flight because, the network conditions changed or there was an update or this or that as it, kind of happens in software. And if I didn't have the ability to update, all those devices would have been dead. And I kid you not, there are devices, these V1s in this old 3D printed box that are still running.
Interesting.
And we shifted out the software, so people reached out, hey, I'm not getting updates. I'm like, oh yeah, I can help you, reflash your SD card and get on our new system.
Interesting. And then how long? So that was about 5 months. And then you had like the second batch of like the V2 prototype.
Yeah, the V2, that was, more than just designing a new device. It went from me to building out a team. So I found other folks in the space who believed in what I was doing, who had complementary skill sets. And I grinded myself. This was a time when I was learning and teaching myself software beyond what I had already did, because I was very much a hardware guy. I started working with manufacturers, but I also started developing like the mobile application. And so I was able to meet some folks who, took my initial operating system, turned it into a much better operating system, really productionalized everything that I was doing. So that took like, 7-8 months, got a little bit of funding to have like the developers on board. And then as we were running out of funding, we were like, all right, well, now or never, we got to launch it. And we were still 3D printing at the time. And we barely set up like a little assembly line in the garage. And about, October of last year, so whatever, a little over a year ago, that's when I started to do the same strategy, but I was a lot more calculated. So I didn't just kind of give the device to any YouTuber who said they would want me to have it. I started very calculated with like a YouTuber with 1,000 subscribers. And then I went to the YouTuber with 10,000 subscribers.
You started with the lower subscribers.
Yeah.
Why?
This niche, they know each other, right? Everybody knows everybody in this niche.
That makes sense.
So to build that hype iteratively was a lot more powerful, because what ended up happening is the bigger guys then were reaching out to me, right? Because they wanted to be a part of this hype. And I created the FOMO for the distribution channel, not just, hey, begging, hey, please, do my thing.
And then you can charge better rates on like, you don't get like, I guess, rugged by getting overcharged by some of these bigger YouTubers. They actually wanted to kind of have your product.
Correct. Yeah.
How did that work from a conversion perspective?
So in terms of conversion perspective, in terms of like cost or?
So you were putting these kind of like products onto these YouTube channels, and it worked the first time around. Mm-hmm. You got 50K in revenue off of these guys. The second time around with the new prototype, how is it working out?
Yeah, so the first, like, let's say we sent it out to 3 YouTubers, the most that these YouTubers had were maybe 50,000 subscribers, but we were able to start getting our numbers back up to what I had done before, 40,000, 50,000 a month. So October was like, 50,000, November was 70,000, December was 80,000, right? Kind of just growing iteratively. And then by January, after we got picked up by like the 2 biggest folks in the space, that's when things really just cranked up and we were able to do, 300-400K in a month.
300-400K in a month.
Yeah, it was wild.
Interesting. And all it was just iteratively moving to larger and larger YouTubers.
Yes. And the price of the coin went up as well because we were getting more exposure on it.
Oh, so you had a speculative asset along with it?
Well, so we're operating not on a network that I built, but you're mining a token on another network.
Gotcha.
So like when we started in October, November, December, the token was at $30. And mind you, this was 2 months after FTX had collapsed.
Interesting.
Right. So this was like, for all intents and purposes, the market should have been totally washed out.
Yeah.
But I think it's actually in our favor because think about what happened. It was centralized exchanges where you own nothing. You have no control. Of course, you're going to start to want to put your money into a real hard asset where you're the producer, you're the provider, instead of on the other end of that chain where you have no control. But long story short, by January, and you can see the price, it's called Chia XCH, it goes from 30 to 45. And at the time, I wasn't sure if it was because of our exposure, but over the last year, I've watched this happen to other coins where, they're the hot mining coin that month and the price goes way up. And that creates a flywheel of sorts. But it can also be pretty dangerous because you get way too many people coming in and then the price crashes and everybody's disappointed. And, just because it got a lot of attention on YouTube doesn't actually warrant like any fundamental reason why it should go up. But that definitely played to our advantage because people started to feel the FOMO.
How are you fulfilling all of these orders coming in? Because it sounds like you were in a living room with like a few guys like that were developers.
Yeah. So at the time we had like half a server rack, right? Because these hard drives need an associated server rack to actually work for the network. And that was like part of our critical advantage is like all of our customers were not going to buy their own server rack. So we did that as the service, right? That was like part of why we were really popular is because instead of having to go out and buy like all this equipment just to have your farm, we would just give you the farm. So at the time we had like half a server rack. We had a couple tables in the garage. Very quickly, I had to start buying a ton of parts, finding many different suppliers, running out suppliers of their supply, right? Like I would order screws on Amazon, order as many as I could, and then they'd be out. I was still using a lot of like secondhand or off the shelf parts. And so, yeah, the scale up was very painful. It took, we probably iterated on the production line in the garage like 20 times until we got it right. And it was even small stuff like the orientation of the table. Because if you put the tables too close together, people start bumping into each other, they drop stuff, whatever. But then the bigger task was taking that half server rack and turning it into like 4 full server racks. And if you've ever run a server rack, they get pretty hot.
What goes into building a server rack?
Yeah, so you build the frame. You got to know how to build servers. You got to, get the server, we had GPUs, we had RAM, et cetera. So that was a little easier for us to source the server components. It was more designing the actual room, getting enough power into that room. And we're in California, we pay crazy energy rates. We had to run new power lines into the room. We had to put a 60,000 BTU air conditioner, right? And there's barely any room to walk around. And then even once it was done, I had to build a bunch of software to monitor. There was 35 servers in this room. And I got so tired of asking, the people working in the server room, hey, what's the status of this? What's the status of that? And one day they were out for a week and I had to step in and do that job. And by the way, I did everything before I would have somebody else do it to find all the inefficiencies and just to do it. And so I'm doing their job for a week and I'm like, man, this is so inefficient. And so that was kind of another, big jump for me in my journey was, I actually had an application to build. So I had these software skills and then I was like, well, now I actually have like a reason to build it. So I just very rapidly built this tool that, once that was done, I never had to ask that question again, right? It was great.
Interesting. And were things like, when you're trying to fulfill it to that many people, were they going through slowdowns? Were they having like longer wait times before they could get their order?
Oh yeah. I think the longest order took 6 months, which is very much I'm not proud of that at all. And I remember having kind of a conversation with my co-founder at the time. What happens if we get 500,000 in orders? And I'm like, we're going to be having to work very hard to fulfill that. And the other tough part is every week that goes by, you need more capacity, right? So even if we could ship, 400K a month, well, in 3 months, we had to ship 1 million in a month just to make up for it. So that's what we did, right? By like month 3 or 4, we had to ship $1 million of orders in a single month to make up for the 4 months of waiting after getting those initial orders.
And you never moved out to like your own warehouse? This was all out of a living room?
It was too expensive at the time, and everything was so thin. We didn't really raise money. It was fairly bootstrapped.
You bootstrapped a hardware business?
Fairly, not 100%, but well,
so
and there was other stuff happening. PayPal, so this is where we didn't bootstrap, is we had to get some money in because PayPal held on to like $250,000 for 6 months. And every day I'm calling PayPal and they're like, no, sorry, this, you got to fulfill the orders. I'm like, how am I supposed to fulfill the orders when you're holding on to my money? So that was very painful. We got kicked off of Square. We got kicked off of Stripe. I mean, it was, right? We couldn't even sell. People are asking us to buy our stuff. We couldn't even sell it because the credit card companies didn't want to deal because, you're crypto, right? A couple months after FTX collapsed.
No way.
And I had to explain to them, I'm just selling computers. You're going to stop. They didn't care because they go to my website and they see that it's crypto and that was it, even though I'm just selling computers.
And how did you get around that?
There's folks out there. We had to work, with private kind of non-Stripe, non-Square, but it's fine because Shopify, all of them integrate into Shopify. It's just a grind, right? I mean, you have to go through, there's all these challenges that come up. And that's the biggest thing. When you go through one of these like crazy scale from selling, $50,000 the year prior to like, couple million the next year, you go through these growing pains. And that's what separates, the people who make it from the people who don't, is can you actually solve those challenges? And I think I got really blessed and lucky to be surrounded by people who just were there to grind it out and solve those challenges.
So would you say you've solved all of them by now?
Absolutely not. But we haven't, it's about what you don't have to change anymore. Right. So I haven't had to change the internal processes. I haven't had to change our suppliers. I haven't had to change the design. That's when things are starting to smooth out. Because even up until, if we had kind of the version 2 done, well, it wasn't done because I was 3D printing. So I had to move to injection mold, and that's a new design effort. When we started selling, we were only trying to sell, a small unit with a couple hard drives. Then people started ordering 20, 30, 40, 60. I didn't design this to run for 60 devices, so I had to build a whole nother thing. And that was months of iterative design, and you're shipping something new to the field, and there's always field failures, et cetera. You have to build QAs. So, is it done? Are the challenges done? Well, we haven't had to change the designs in a while, but now we've moved to, kind of more classic challenges of just cash flow and having to put down money for orders and, still being a relatively bootstrapped company. It's been challenging to scale up beyond what we can just fulfill in a month.
I mean, one of the things that makes hardware so hard is that you need money to build a product. It's not like software where you can just kind of like sit in Cursor or VS Code and kind of have like something built. You literally have to order physical parts, and then I guess PayPal holds your money because it seems to be a recurring theme with everyone that has a physical like goods business. It's interesting to me that no one's, I guess, like figured it out, in the sense that every other week or every other month, it feels like we hear about like some overhyped hardware company running out of money, or their launch falls flat, or they're dead on arrival. Do you even still think about that right now, or are your marketing channels and your systems good enough to where now you're just worried about like scaling up?
There was definitely a period of time where I was staring down, the end of the company. And it was when we went from, 400K in orders per month to 50K. And that is normal for a lot of businesses. They're seasonal, right? If you have any hard goods business, they sell a lot during Christmas. They don't sell that much during the summer. And mature businesses can handle that because they have baked it into their margin that they need enough operating cash. We didn't know any of that, right? How could we? It was our first couple months of business. And we had to invest a lot into those servers and scaling up and just, failing, and we had returns. So there was a period where we were very much in the negative. No one was looking to, finance the business at the time. And I had to decide what I was going to do. And really the only answer was I need to sell my way out of this. I have a product, and if I can't sell it, there's no point in getting investors. There's no point in continuing the business if I'm not able to actually continue to sell this product beyond the initial hype. And so that's what I did. I dug my heels in, and I figured out how to get us, out of kind of this hole and figure out what is the minimum amount I need to sell per month to stay in business. And that's what I did. I figured it out.
How did you figure it out? Like, where were you selling?
Yeah, well, so, the distribution channels that we work with, they very much rely on continuing to give their audience new and engaging content, right? So if they were to just keep shilling my product, their audience would not be very happy, right? So while it worked for several months to go through these specific channels, I had to then find new areas and new channels. I also at the time did have my own existing audience that I had not tapped at all because I felt very uncomfortable sending an email with a deal to people when they hadn't gotten their order. So at around the same time that we had those low sales months, we got caught up on orders. And the first thing I did was email marketing. And a lot of it just comes down to that sense of urgency, FOMO, right? And it's a very tried and true marketing tactic of, hey, you've got a limited window of time to get in on this next batch. And just doing that over email was successful for me.
So what was the high level email workflows that you used? It's different. I feel like it's different than in hardware than it is on software. With hardware, I have a friend who runs an email marketing agency for specifically like drop shipping kind of stores. He's raking in like $100K a month. Mm-hmm. And from what he tells me, like it's very just like, it's a hard system to crack, but once you've cracked it, it works across pretty much everything. Was it the same way for hardware?
Yes. So urgency is key. And it was something that we actually baked in before any of this happened. Each of our devices we sell as a batch, and each batch has like custom artwork, right? So not only are you getting the device, but you might be getting a different color and a different design. So for example, one of the highlights in September or November with this initial, influencer that we had worked with, we did like a limited collaboration, right? Like Evergreen X Voss coin. We created an NFT. We had artwork that resembled themes from his channel, which were his dog. It was called the Tails edition. It was the first time we dropped a new color. So really what you're doing is you're shifting the buying behavior from, oh, this is cool and I want it, to, oh, I'm supporting this beyond just like the functionality of the device, right? So I'm not buying this because I think this specific device is going to make me more money than the other one. I'm buying this because I want to participate in this drop, right? And that's something that, depending on the product you have, you may not actually be able to do. If you're selling furniture, you might not be able to do this limited drop. But when you're selling a computer, you're fairly flexible to do whatever you do. And that's something we've repeated now a couple times, where we created these cards with like custom artwork on it. And actually when you scan the card, it has a theme in the app. So it becomes this experience where you're connected to the creator or the brand that you buy from, beyond just like, oh, I'm earning money off this device, or, I'm supporting this company. And that's been one of the more successful strategies is doing these limited kind of edition collaborations.
That's dope. Do you plan on building out, marketing funnels related to like Google ads, Facebook ads?
We've done a little bit of Google ads. Yes, we are building it out. It just has not been the key area of focus. I think we're still kind of in the data collection where we're trying to figure out, what works, what doesn't. Additionally, we have within our customer cohort, we have like several kind of personas. We've got the people who are just dipping their toe for $299 or $1,000. We have people all the way up who are ready to spend $100,000. Those are two very different segments.
Yeah.
And so just funneling different segments to go to different places of our site and trying to actually not commingle the two has actually been, more of a challenge than I had anticipated.
Interesting. Have you ever done like I don't even know what to call it, but like if you look at Avi with Tab, he's just been very loud online, and there's a lot of buzz around him, especially once Humane kind of was like, quote unquote dead on arrival. People were kind of looking at him, and then the Rabbit came out, and there was that whole thing he did with like the Rewind founders. But like, it feels like a lot of people in SF have heard about Tab. He got his Fast Company article, and a lot of it was literally just him tweeting and like sharing the whole like vision. This is going to change the world, like kind of that angle. Have you done any of that?
Not particularly. So, and I love Avi. He's great. And, I love his vision. And, I chatted with him specifically about this. I'm like, how did you build up? And for him, he put the work in, right? He built up his own audience. He knows how to work with the media. And that's, something that's specific to his skill set. I have focused in a very different area where like I've been doing hardware for 10 years. I'm just like, I didn't even think about that. I'm from Chicago. This idea of like hype was not really something that came to me naturally. I was very much focused on kind of like business fundamentals outside of hype. And now having moved here, having, spoken with people like Avi, and especially like at Founders Inc., like it is very much an asset that I've been trying to work on. But there is also a lot of, mind share. Like for example, right, I work on a network that not many folks have heard of, especially in SF where there's a very specific mind share around Ethereum or Solana. trying to break through on something that like I didn't even build this network. I chose it because of the technical fundamentals, but then trying to convince folks that, oh no, this is the thing you should be hyped about. That sometimes can be more of an uphill battle than it's worth. Whereas something broad like AI, like you don't have to convince anybody to get hyped about AI.
That makes sense. That makes sense. Do you have any people that do marketing on your team? Like, what does the team look like?
So yeah, I do a lot of the marketing and sales. We have a customer service person who has actually done a lot of the inbound, right? So when we get a lot of inbound, we get a ton of tickets. A lot of them are customer service. Hardware is hard, right? You have field failures that you got to fix. We actually turn a lot of angry customers into new sales.
Really?
It happened many times. I'll be on the phone, and it's the way that I talk to folks because I just sympathize with them, and I'm like, trust me, I'm not happy either that this is happening, right? I don't want to be here, fixing. I always make this joke. I never want to see you again. And they love it. And it drives a lot of confidence, especially in an industry that is dominated by large Chinese companies that like don't even answer you, right? For them to build a relationship with me, the owner of the business, I promise you it's happened at least a dozen times. They had a problem. They were mad. I've had people threaten to knock down my door and then turn around and buy $1,000 worth of equipment from me.
No way.
Right. And so just inbound on customer service has been, another very lucrative channel. And, this college guy I hired just like told him to hit his targets of like selling at least, $30K a month. And he just, when you give someone a target like that and they're just hungry, they just like go for it. But a lot of that still is inbound and the outbound again has just been like highly targeted through niches. Yeah.
Your customer service guy is just like a college kid?
Yeah.
How did you find him? How did you convince him?
In the community. Didn't need to convince him. Everybody knows who we are in the community and, eager to help us out.
I saw a tweet recently and it definitely like, I've been thinking about it a lot. It was something along the lines of like, there's an insane amount of alpha in just finding every 20-year-old tucked into a corner somewhere that's like grinding on a bunch of different things and just like giving them money and resources to work on those things. And especially in SF, there are like 1,000,001 cases of like kid drops out of college, kid goes to college, finds someone at college, really hungry, like kind of wants to be like the next big thing, but doesn't really have like an outlet. He doesn't have his own startup. She doesn't have her own startup. And there's just huge amounts of value in just finding those people and figuring out how to work with them. But something that people actually run into a lot, and I've started noticing this with my friends, is like, once you have that like raw talent on your team, it's not natural to like know how to manage someone like that or turn them into like a cannon that you can just kind of like point at anything. How did you go about, like, was this someone who had done customer service before?
Yeah. I mean, they're a very personable person. And you're asking me like, how did I do this? I still haven't done this, right? I'm still, figuring out how to be a leader for my peers. I mean, I'm like the second youngest person in the company.
It's so funny how much
right.
that
Most
happens.
of the people I work with are older than me. And there's no good answer. It takes at least a year to develop a relationship with somebody where you guys just understand each other, especially when they're older than you. There's really no good answer. Maybe if you have a track record and, you have a large company and like young people are just eager to work and you have those structures in place. But when the company's really small, it really is about personal relationship with them and trusting each other and wanting to build each other up, right? That's the most important thing.
For sure. One of the things we had also talked about kind of off air was you've worked with some very interesting people before you went and started your own company. Mm-hmm. I guess first you want to like talk about who some of those people were. Yeah,
absolutely. And I'll just give a little background. So, I started doing startups and most of my work was in design and I was working with friends. And then I just got really into 3D printing. And when I was younger, one of the products that just sparked my imagination was Google Glass. And I actually had the opportunity to like win a Google Glass. So I invented a wearable that you could stick onto any pair of glasses and have Google Glass be a part of it. And it was using a voice assistant. This was back in 2017. So when Tab came out, I like hit him up. I'm like, yo, Avi, like I have worked very similarly on this, but like a lifetime ago, right? And that sparked some awesome conversations because I worked on this like right when Siri came out. And we got, we launched it on Kickstarter and that was kind of like my claim to fame in high school was like, I did a Kickstarter. So when I came to Seattle, which is where I went to school, and Seattle's like an incredible tech hub, somebody was like, oh, hey, did you know like the creator of Google Glass is part of the UW, faculty? So I reached out, cold emailed him, and he got back to me the next day and was like, hey, you should come in and present your product to my team at Amazon. I jumped out of my bed. Like this was a dream come true, right? Like this product started my career more or less. So I came out, I met him, I presented to the team, and he offered me a job. So I got to work with him and a small group of like thought leaders at Amazon. And the whole thing was, if you build something good, you can pitch Jeff Bezos. And so, for a 18-year-old kid, so hungry and eager, I was just like doing everything I could to get to that meeting. And I wasn't able to get to that meeting, but that's okay. I got torn up, and you've heard a lot about Amazon's culture, about writing, and a lot of it comes down to clarity of thought of your ideas.
What is it about Amazon's culture about writing?
They just force you to be more clear in your ideas than in a presentation. I have stories, by the way, of like, because I met some of these old heads from Amazon who tried to give Jeff presentations, and he's like, get out of here. If you ever give me a presentation again, you're fired.
What was wrong with it?
So the word that was used is presentations can be very hand wavy, right? And in Silicon Valley, I'm building the product, right?
It's the hand motions. It's the same three hand motions.
Right. And all you have to do is put a slide that says like the future.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, right. Whatever.
TAM 1 billion.
Right. We just saw it with Rabbit, right? And like a lot of people thought that presentation was great, but like Jeff Bezos probably hate that presentation, right? He would rather have like a one pager very clearly explaining the idea. Now, the key difference is, why should Amazon do it? And that's where everything breaks apart, because when you have a large company and you have a reputation, the way that you calculate shipping is entirely different, because you could actually damage your reputation by shipping things that are bad. Whereas like when you're a startup, when you don't have a reputation, fail fast, right? So that was the big difference. And that's why I didn't want to keep working there ultimately. It's because I didn't really feel like, I didn't feel that it was, the best products and the best shippers win. It was more about perception and politics. And that is why you do see a lot of products, both out of like Amazon and Google, that just don't go the distance. And that's okay, right? Because they're fostering bodies of research, and a lot of it becomes research. There's no room for like that level of research or long-term development cycles, or, bring in the executives when you haven't even launched a project, right? But it was great. It was one of the most, fundamental experiences. And again, it was my dream job. I was very lucky to have gotten my dream job at 18, because it didn't ever leave me wondering, oh, what if I didn't do startups and just went and worked at a big company doing new product?
That's so interesting. Did you meet anyone there that you ended up working with later?
No, not particularly. Not a lot of those folks actually are doing startups. And that's partially just because Seattle is not a very startup-y. I mean, it is, right? You have Microsoft and Amazon,
sure,
but they just suck up all the really good talent.
That makes sense. I could see that. In the early days of building out the team, what were you looking for?
It was very organic. It was all the people in the community. And it's because, it's one of these things like, oh, if you found this community, then like we must be like-minded.
So if you know, kind of.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting.
And it was people who I had worked with who were eager to help me for free, that once I was able to get, a little bit of money in the door, they're the first people I hired. And those are the people who welcomed me into their house and let me do construction in their living room.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And take over their garage,
That's awesome. When you keep talking, like you kept mentioning like the amount of power and the amount of energy that you use. When we were talking before, you were telling me about how your dad comes up to you because you have this insane power bill or this insane energy bill. One of the things I talked about a few days ago with Sharif was people are starting to say, one of the biggest problems AI is going to run into is actually just going to be the strain that it's going to, bring to like the power grid. It's just a lot of energy that like it starts to suck up. How do you see that? Like, do you think that's actually a real problem? Like, how do you see that being solved in the future?
Yeah, I mean, energy generation is ultimately our only limit. And physics, right? Physics and power generation are really our only limit. You can continue to make computers more efficient. And the first direction I went was to go for hard drives, specifically because they're low power. But as I've gotten more and more into the ecosystem where there are these large ASIC miners, right? Bitcoin miners who are just sucking down all this energy, it does become more and more important to find where these sources of energy are cheap and how you can stake claim on it, right? And that's something that I've been focusing on personally, because even though our end consumer has a low power device, in order to make those devices, we need a lot of power. And for me, getting ahead of that now instead of hitting that bottleneck down the road is very important.
How do you even focus on something like that when you're relatively still such a young company?
You meet the right people, and you offer value, right? So in my particular case, I've brushed across many people who have, large ASIC mining facilities, and they're asking me, hey, you seem like somebody who knows how to get more per watt, right? A hard drive produces much more value per watt than an ASIC miner, even a GPU, because it's so low power. When you look at like the dollar value that you get out per watt, it's higher. Now, the difference is the capital you have to put up might be a lot higher. And so for people, that calculus doesn't make sense. But, I've met folks who have, dozens or 100 megawatts of energy. They're trying to figure out what is the most valuable thing I can put between me and my energy to get the most dollar per watt. Some proponents could say, well, that's bad because we shouldn't actually be sucking up a lot of energy. But I disagree. I think the more value we get out of our natural resources is a net benefit to society, because the power is not going anywhere, and coal is not a better way of getting energy than clean energy for a variety of reasons. And people understand it. The only barrier to transition to newer forms of energy is those upfront costs and justifying those upfront costs. And it almost works better, right? If you can justify the upfront cost because you're going to put it into something, you're going to put a box in the middle, whether that's a GPU, a hard drive, an ASIC, any computer is going to get more value than, say, land or rent or even, lights, right? Like lights don't produce any money, but they suck a ton of energy. So if you have something in every home, in every car that can turn that energy directly back into money, you now actually have a lot more incentive to go to cleaner, maybe more expensive energy sources in the short term. And that's a lot of what people would argue Bitcoin is really good at, is actually finding better sources of energy. And there's arguments and debates to be had on either side, but I actually generally agree that beyond the currency, what Bitcoin has been able to do by balancing energy and creating these pieces of hardware that almost act as like batteries or like financial incentives to get better forms of energy is actually a very interesting use case for distributed, cryptocurrency networks.
I feel like that's, an argument or an angle about Bitcoin that I actually haven't heard before that much.
Well, here's a specific example. So Texas, if you remember a couple of years ago, had like a big power outage. You remember this?
We were watching a video last night on YouTube about the danger of an EMP attack and how society would kind of react to it. And they brought up that.
Yeah. So that did not happen because Texas doesn't have enough energy. Texas has more energy and raw materials, than I think the United States needs for 100 years. Really? The US alone has in South America, there are volcanoes that could power the world for the right? The question is there an incentive to tap that energy? And so in Texas, they have all these wells, but let's say during the winter, they can make a killing. But during the summer, they're making zero. So what do? They have to shut down the well. And then when the winter comes around, it's not enough for them to start the well back up. So during the summer, the best thing they could do is mine Bitcoin, because it's better than shutting down the well. Even if they're not making that much money off of that equipment, it's better than shutting down the well. And so acting as a load balancer and a battery can work beyond just power generation for people's homes. It can work well even in data centers when, there's a hype cycle for AI, but maybe it tapers off. And I don't know if that's going to happen at all in the next several years, but it could be a really good balancing act with crypto and AI. So
do you see a world where the consumer electronics we have in our houses will be able to pay for the cost of our energy?
That's very much the vision of Evergreen. And maybe it's not necessarily energy, but a television is a really good example. Like a television mostly just sits and does nothing in your house most of the time. Right? Your laptop sits in your backpack and does nothing. Your car sits in your garage and does nothing.
True.
So this idea of just like a well, it's sitting there doing nothing. Let's find something that is better than nothing, right? That is kind of the fundamental idea behind Evergreen, is that we want to take all these consumer electronics that sit there and do nothing and find ways for them to be revenue generating assets. And maybe it's not passive income per se, because realistically, someone might not get that excited about $20 a month. But if I told you that you could buy a TV and just that TV sitting there is going to pay for your Netflix, and we could actually create that incentive structure where the TV, creates some sort of value that goes back to the companies that are providing this media, we're now living in a world with way less waste than before, right? We're living in a world where actually you don't want to throw your TV out after a year, right? And adding value like that is something that's uniquely unlocked by distributed networks and kind of this new world that we're living in where everything is networked. And again, Evergreen is kind of building on top of these building blocks of both easy to access hardware. It's very easy now for for companies that have figured it out to create hardware, and networks that actually incentivize hardware all the time.
So if I want to now get into, mining, there's a lot of technology we have here at Founders Inc. There's a lot of stuff we have kind of like, or a lot of space we have kind of even in like, other offices that our friends own or even just like the apartments that our friends like kind of live in. What is like the roadmap for me to get into it?
Well, if you're just trying to get into mining, period, and you don't have a lot of energy, in my opinion, hard drives are the best way to do it. We could go down a whole rabbit hole about mining versus DPIN is a very popular topic.
What is
right
DPIN?
now. DPIN is decentralized physical infrastructure networks.
And what's the argument between them?
So there's two clear distinctions. So the first is a marketplace. DPIN is generally referred to as a marketplace, meaning I have some idle resource and I'm using cryptocurrency or adjacent networks to allow people to access those resources. That's not the same as Bitcoin mining or chia farming. Bitcoin mining, it's not an idle resource. You're using that resource to actually secure a network and build blocks. And again, without getting too deep into like the minutia, you can think of it as like Bitcoin is like specifically wasteful. Like you are using all of the Bitcoin's computer to do something that is generally not useful beyond securing Bitcoin and like preventing bad actors from using Bitcoin. But in DPIN networks, like an example is like Akash or RenderCoin, you're actually using idle compute to do something useful and proving that you did that. And that's actually, one of the reasons why I wouldn't even call it skeptical, but just like I'm hesitant is that you can do all this with US dollars, right? You can pay people to use their idle compute in US dollars. There's like actually no real need for crypto to be involved per se. There are interesting applications, but in Bitcoin, like it is fundamentally crypto and hashing and, SHA-256 that is the innovation. And so, back to kind of the point, right? If you're doing kind of this pure proof of work mining or proof of space mining, one of my devices, you can plug it in. It only takes as much of a light bulb and you can earn anywhere from, a tiny amount, $10 a month to, $1,000 a month on, something that fits on your bookshelf.
How do I make $1,000 a month off of this?
You buy, 60 of the miners and
60 of the miners. And so what does that come up to as like an upfront cost?
It's probably like $15,000.
And it would pay itself off in a year and some change.
No. I mean, we're in a a bear market. So in the best of markets, you're hoping for something like 6 to 12 months ROI. In the worst of markets, like Bitcoin ROI can be never because your cost of energy is higher than what you're earning in Bitcoin. And if your cost of energy is higher than what you're earning in Bitcoin, you shut it off. Because why would you be spending money to earn Bitcoin when you could just go buy Bitcoin?
Right.
So one of the beauties of hard drive mining is even in the worst markets, when it's a 6 or 7 year payoff, you're not losing money, right? You're not better off shutting it off because then you would actually be losing money. Then your asset that you bought would not be generating revenue. In 6 or 7 years, in crypto miners is for most, crypto mining people is too long, but like for most revenue generating assets, 6 or 7 years is actually fine.
Have major hedge funds started to break into this then?
Yeah. So at the highest level, like BlackRock has taken stake in Bitcoin mining operations. Notably, like ExxonMobil, who's a large energy producer, is doing Bitcoin mining, right? Because again, like they have all this extra energy. Like, do they either just not use it or do they put it into something that can generate revenue?
And what does it look like for these companies to do it at such a high level? Are they just setting up entire farms?
Yeah, the margins are very thin, but they're profitable. And this is why it has gotten so hard for the average person to mine Bitcoin. Because when you have somebody who can do it at a much lower margin, they're going to price you out. It's a perfect market, right? So if there's, 10,000 miners and 9,000 of them are perfectly fine, only making a penny a day, but you need to make $1 a day, you just can't do it. Again, it's a perfect market, and it's a beautiful system in a lot of ways, but there's a lot of flaws, right? What started as this idea of, again, use your computer, your laptop that's sitting around to earn some, passive income and contribute to this distributed network has not really panned out that way specifically for Bitcoin because it has become a game of large energy providers who can acquire the energy for the cheapest. Not a bad thing per se. It's just, for me, I'm a technologist who likes to make technology accessible to a lot of people. And I just, as I was doing GPU mining and as I was doing ASIC mining, it just was not apparent to me that this would be like a available technology for people. But hard drives and solid state drives, on the other hand, you have a solid state drive, you have multiple. You have one sitting in your computer, you have one sitting in your phone. And for the most of that solid state drive's life, it's actually empty, right? It's sitting there doing nothing, just like a well that's sitting there doing nothing. So what is maybe the next step for Evergreen, as kind of these networks get more acceptance, is ideally we're shipping consumer devices that just have this technology built in, and it's revenue generating. And as you fill it, maybe you get a little bit less revenue off of it, but at least it's not sitting there empty for the majority of its life.
That makes sense. That makes sense. And so when you're thinking, and this is also a question I kind of use to wrap up the podcast, when you're thinking about Evergreen for the next year, or even the next 5 years, what would you have to accomplish for you to come back and do this podcast again then and consider it a success?
Well, I think it's already, pretty successful just because I've gotten to serve so many people, but a lot of people are, looking to pay off the device. So if I came back in a year and the devices were, closer to being paid off, I'd be pretty happy. In 5 years though, to be honest with you, and this is all of crypto, a lot of it is speculation right now, and that's fine, right? Speculation is, making money is commerce, right? People generally have kind of these fixed principles of like, I want to save time, or I want to save money, or I want to make money. And Evergreen in its current state very much does those things. That being said, I'd like us to get to a point where people are not buying these devices solely because they think they're going to generate revenue. I'd like to get closer to this model of like, I buy this TV because it pays for my Netflix, right? I buy this device because on my laptop from Apple, I have to pay for all these services, but on my laptop from Evergreen, all my services are paid for.
Interesting.
Yeah, and that's kind of the vision among other things. I mean, I think generally like owning revenue generating assets is really interesting. Like GPUs, we're expanding into GPUs and allowing people to do, own a GPU so they can participate in AI. But that doesn't even need to be tied to crypto. That's just like, helping people own assets and maintain them and earn revenue on them. But yeah, that core vision is around disrupting consumer electronics as a whole, to leverage the waste that they generally have throughout their product life cycle.
I feel like the more we do this podcast, the more I get surprised by like different angles for long-term visions that I wouldn't have seen. I guess it's also because I have a surface level understanding of a lot of the companies we talk to.
It's a challenge.
So much for them to branch out.
It's a challenge. And I think the more you're working on like foundational and fundamental technologies, the more options you have. And we can always reference these large companies, but like Amazon's maybe the perfect example. If you look at them and say, you're a bookstore, Jeff, right? Like, how many books do you want to sell this year? And he's like, well, look, I want to sell more books this year, but that's not what Amazon is, right? And that's a struggle for every founder, and especially founders who are doing kind of these foundational, fundamental paradigm shift companies, because they have to get it off the ground in a way that makes sense to people in the market today, but create the ability for them to go to point A to B to Z, and have these kind of compounding things as they go. And that's very challenging. It requires a lot of juggling. But it's a common pattern in kind of all these foundational companies that they might look very different than where they end up.